became the Supreme Court judge. And you look at just some of the pictures below, folks were trying to, at that point, thinking about, okay, well, we need to integrate. And so when this came down, this was like a great win and just a great accomplishment. And it meant a lot to the African-American community. Okay, so before we get started, I want to kind of give you some context and some foundational work, just so you kind of see how we actually got to Ruby's story. Don't worry. I'm not going to be too history geekish on this, but I think it's important that you understand just how Ruby's story began and became really, really known. Okay, May of 1954, the Supreme Court outlawed school segregation of Brown versus Board of Education case. And incidentally, that was the same year that Ruby was born. Okay, so it's 1954. And then the next year, 1955, Rosa Parks was arrested for failure to give her seat. And then a bus boycott began in Montgomery, Alabama. Okay, so then in 1956, Martin Luther King called out the Montgomery boycott. So we have 54, 55, 56. Then in 1957, President Eisenhower ordered federal troops to escort 9 teenagers to desegregate Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas. And you may have known them by the Little Rock Nine. So my first question was, when I was doing some research, I go, wait a minute now, I thought the Supreme Court overruled segregation in 1954. Why did it take 55, 56, 57 for a high school to be segregated? I mean, I understand maybe 1955 or maybe even 1966 the latest, but why is our way at 1957? And then in November of 1960, that's when Ruby first integrated high school, elementary school. And so I got to thinking, okay, wait a minute now. So you're saying from 1954, it took 6 years. What happened? Well, a thought came to me, and actually a quote from Martin Luther King came to me that said, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but bends towards justice." While that's true, I also kind of add an addendum to that. Sometimes that arc doesn't bend unless pressure is applied. And so what you've seen here in 1957, President Eisenhower had to order federal troops to escort the Little Rock Nine in. And then 3 years after that, there were still, the South was truly segregated. And so you have five or six states that resisted segregation: Alabama, Georgia, Mississippi, Louisiana, and South Carolina. And so those states were just rigid against desegregation, and they just fought hard to keep the segregations going. So that's why it took until 1957 for the Little Rock Nine to have federal troops. That's that kind of pressure we're talking about. Federal troops had to be deployed in order for them to desegregate. Then in November 14th, 1960, four black first graders integrated two public schools in New Orleans, and Ruby Bridges was one of them. And so my next thought was, okay, now I know I went to school, so school starts in September. So why is it that her first day wasn't until November 14th, 1960? Well, what was happening during the summer and during September, October, the superintendents of Louisiana and the state of Louisiana was fighting desperately to keep segregation out of their state. So they were getting pressured by the federal courts that, you're gonna have to desegregate, because the case came down way back in 1954. It's 1960. You're gonna have to desegregate. So what they thought was, the superintendents in Louisiana said, okay, well, tell you what we're gonna do. We're gonna give those kindergartners, the ones that are gonna go to the first grade, we're gonna give them a test. And if they pass the test, then they can proceed to the first grade, knowing that the tests were probably biased and they wouldn't pass them. So then that would lend them some time, or give us some time to still not segregate, and then give them a good reason why they can speak to the courts of why their schools haven't been desegregated. Well, they gave administered a test to about 100 children, and out of 100 children, 4 actually passed the test. And one of those 4 was Ruby Bridges. Well, when it was known that 4 of the little children had passed the test, the NAACP went to the parents and asked them, okay, we would like for your kids to integrate these schools because they were the only ones who passed the test. Well, one of the children's parents, they bowed out. They go, no, we're going to opt out of this one. You know, we don't want the harm or what could come to if you're in segregation and all the violence. So they kind of backed up out of it. The other 3 girls, there were 3 other girls, they were from across town. So they went to another school, another elementary school. And so then that left Ruby Bridges to integrate William Frantz High School all by herself. And this is what makes her story so unique, because you're going to see on her journey that she did this with no friends, nobody. It was just her in this school. And so that's where we're going to pick up our story at. So now we know that we're waiting for, now we're November 14th, Monday, November 14th, 1960, and we're going to start her journey as she starts her year-long education at William Frantz. Ruby and her mom on their first day of school. Well, the first day of school, before they even got there, they weren't really sure if they wanted her to go to school. Her father was against it. Her father had the same concerns that the other families about the violence and exposing their child, because they have never been to a segregated school. And so the mother was like, no, I want my children to get the best education, because they had just moved to Louisiana from Mississippi, and they didn't have the best education, but she wanted her children to have the best education they could possibly receive, even if it means that they would have to go to some hardship. But the father naturally was just really concerned about the safety of the family. So they went back and forth, and ultimately it was decided that Ruby would actually go to William Frantz and integrate that school. What you see here is 4 of the marshals that were sent. So 4 federal marshals were sent to pick her up every day from school. And this is the first day of school with her mother. And so what would happen is that they would pick her up, and there were crowds outside her house, blocked off from the streets, and they would take her to school. The first day of school, they walked up through an angry crowd and walked to school, and they sat in the principal's office. And back in those days, they had a really big window in front of the principal's office so everybody could see you. So they sat there, and what they saw was people coming in, taking the kids out of school, teachers walking by. And so let's say they got to like 8:30. So they sat there at 8:30 waiting for her to go to class. Nothing happened. 12 o'clock, they're eating lunch in the same principal's office. They haven't got up yet. 3 o'clock comes, now school's over. And so Ruby's thinking, hey, this is an easy school, because all I do is sit in the principal's office all day, because there was no teachers that would actually teach her. So she goes home, next day is the exact same thing. And so the school just kept being emptied, and there were those that just wouldn't stay in school. So then ultimately on Wednesday, her mother said, I have to work, I can't go to school with you every day. So on Wednesday, that's when the marshals picked her up and took her to school by herself. And so going forward, she was going to have to go to school by herself. And so when she got there that Wednesday, Miss Henry, her teacher from Boston, came and said, you know what? I'll teach her. And so what you're going to see now is that she starts her school day with Miss Henry. But what I want to show you now, I want to show you what she faced every day, so you can see some of the resiliency. Because for this little girl to face these things that she faced, she had to have faith, family, and friendship in order for her to go to the school every day by herself. As you can see here, it's called Six Steps to Justice, I call it. This is an article. This is four Negroes entered the New Orleans school on jeers and onlookers. And so you can kind of get an idea of the crowd that was there. You see that her walking up with, flanked by the four marshals, federal marshals. Actually, there are 25 or more that was actually deployed, but they're all dispersed throughout around the school and on different routes. But these are the four. She always had the same four that actually escorted her to her school. This is what she faced every day for that year. Every day, mothers would carry a tiny coffin with a black doll in it as they protested. Ruby remembered the first time she saw the baby in the coffin as the first time she became afraid. And I just thought this was just something else. So in the first corner, you see the mothers. Okay, so these every morning, about 250 mothers would actually come out and stand in front of the school, yelling and screaming racial epithets and just really just being disruptive about Ruby. You don't see the fathers there because they were actually at work, but the mothers showed up every single day. Below that picture, you see folks throwing eggs, doing all kinds of different things, try to disrupt. And remember, you have to remember, this is a 6-year-old girl without a mother. And she's just showing up to school, doing what her mother said, go to school, be a good girl. And this is what she's faced with every single day she shows up. The top corner, it says threatening to kill and poison Ruby. There's a lady that showed up every single day and she screamed, "I'm gonna poison you, I'm gonna poison you. I don't know how I'm gonna do it, but I'm gonna poison you." And so you can imagine this is what she's hearing every single day. And this woman showed up every single day to have those chants. Then down below it says young men and children. She was probably one of the ones that was pulled out of school. And those young men, those were the ones that came after their high school, school was over. Then they would come out and join the crowd. The middle picture, this is what they would bring to the school every day. I mean, it's just astounding. I know this is black and white, but that doesn't look like an African-American baby. At least not to me, it doesn't. I have to look like an American baby. Maybe that's all they could get. But this is what they would actually bring every single day. And Ruby would have to kind of walk through this crowd seeing all this. So it was really just an astounding time for a little girl to have to endure and absorb all these different people yelling and screaming. You see some people smiling there. And so this is like the biggest thing in the city at this time. And what made it more difficult was, like I said, she didn't have like the other school did have like three little girls or 3 students to go with her. She was having to endure this all by herself. Next, what I want to show you guys is some actual footage. And this is some actual footage of what was going on down in New Orleans during 1960. Since it's actual footage, there's some language or one language that's kind of politically incorrect. So just as a disclaimer, but I wanted to have an accurate rendition of what was going on, just so you can kind of get a good feel. Here we go.
The clash between peaceful protest and violent resistance would produce images that caused the country to sit up and take notice. In New Orleans, on the morning of November 14th, 1960, federal marshals escorted a 6-year-old girl named Ruby Bridges to the local all-white elementary school.
I remember turning onto the street. I saw barricades and police officers and just people everywhere. When I saw all of that, I immediately thought that it was Mardi Gras. I had no idea that they were here to keep me out of the school.
Ruby, were you scared? I would have been terrified.
I wasn't, actually, because, it's very hard for parents, I think, to explain to a 6-year-old what was actually happening.
They didn't say it's the white school, you're making history.
I remember them saying, "Ruby, you're going to go to a new school today, and you better behave."
But Ruby was making history. 6 years earlier, after decades of struggle, the NAACP had won a major legal victory, Brown versus Board of Education, in which the Supreme Court declared that the doctrine of separate but equal schools was unconstitutional. But in many places, that triumph did not translate into change. For years after Brown, much of the South simply refused to integrate. Now, Ruby would be one of 6 New Orleans children chosen to desegregate several all-white elementary schools.
They were screaming and shouting and chanting 2, 4, 6, 8. We don't want to integrate.
The mothers of downtown New Orleans screaming at a Negro child as she entered the William Franz Elementary School, first in the city to be integrated.
Once I got into school, all of these people here rushed inside of the building. They were taking out their children. Over 500 kids walked out of school that day.
What is your reaction to the court's decision continuing integration?
We don't want the niggas going in this school.
Well,
It's a white school.
They didn't see a child. They saw change in what they thought was being taken from them. They never saw a child.
I like that she said that they never saw a child, that what they saw is change. And I thought that was really true. Also, what was going on at the time, that there were those that still wanted their children to try to attend the school. And they were getting harassed just as much as everyone else, or just as much as Ruby was. So the top picture is the Gabrielles, and they were taking their children to school, and they were getting harassed and rocks thrown through their windows, and just, totally just being, just harassed. So ultimately, they ended up moving to another state because they couldn't take it anymore. Down below that picture, it says that you said Traders, Little Rock slowed you down, but the New Orleans will stop you. See, that's a reference to what we talked about earlier, to the Little Rock Nine. They were still harkening back to what happened in Arkansas, and they're like 3 years earlier, and they're saying like, we're just not gonna do that here. The middle picture is actually, he's a minister, he was a pastor in that city, and he was taking his little daughter to school. And they were yelling and screaming at him too. That picture next with the woman with the scarf, when I first seen it, I thought that was a picture that she was doing that and yelling at Ruby. Actually, she was screaming and saying she's gonna strangle the pastor. Can you believe that? Now I know she probably wore that to church that Sunday. Okay, I don't know that for sure, but I can just imagine. But these are the mothers that were out there that were actually, protesting and yelling at even those other than Ruby, when you had some of the students who still tried to attend. So I can just imagine the scene, what was going on at that time. Miss Henry and Ruby alone together. Remember that first day when Miss Henry came? She seen Ruby and she said she was just the kindest, sweetest little girl she had ever seen. And she hadn't grown up where there was prejudice, so she had no problem, teaching Ruby. Well, every day they would go to the classroom, and Ruby was the only one in the class, and she couldn't go out and play on the playground. So they would have to do calisthenics or jump rope or jacks, whatever, actually inside the room. When she went to the bathroom, the federal marshals would actually have to take her themselves to the escort her to the bathrooms. And so when she ate lunch, she always ate lunch by herself in isolation. It's almost like the ultimate social distancing at this time. So when Miss Henry, she would leave and go to the teachers' lounge, and believe it or not, she was ostracized by the teachers and the principal, because the teachers and the principals could not stand Ruby. They could not stand Miss Henry because she was teaching Ruby. So she was ostracized too. So day after day, Ruby would eat lunch in that room by herself. Well, I'm sure the isolation kind of started to get into a little bit, because one day they found like mice and rodents and all kind of bugs in the room. So when they did the inspection, they found that Ruby had been putting and placing her sandwiches in her desk and in cupboards. And back in the day, they used to have these big old large vats of glue. Some may remember that. And so she was pouring her milk inside the glue, and her mother was saying that all she wanted to do was eat at home was eat potato chips and soda. And that may have been just because she heard so much about, I'm gonna poison you, I'm gonna, all the kind of different things. So she just didn't want to eat. And so what happened is when Miss Henry found out about that, she never left her again to eat alone in her room. So every day they would stay together and just have class, eat lunch, and do exercises. And whenever she was teaching Ruby on the board, and this is what the picture you're seeing here, she always had Ruby come up to the board with her, so she would never be alone. And so she just had, Miss Henry just had a heart for Ruby, and they forged a bond that actually lasted a lifetime. And so she just couldn't believe just how this little girl was going through so much. And every day she was dressed pristinely, she was polite, she was courteous, and she was just the kindest, gentlest, strongest girl, even though every day she was walking through that gauntlet of those we had just seen earlier. Robert Coles and Ruby. Robert Coles is a noted child psychiatrist. And so what happened here is that he happened to see her and all the commotion at school one day as he was just passing by. He was stationed there. And he went to the NAACP and asked them, could he speak to the parents, because he wanted to know what was kind of going on with her if she's having to experience, this type of environment every single day. So he became friends with Ruby, and she became, great friends with him. You hear all the time, like it takes a village, and what you're going to start seeing is that Ruby was by herself, but she had a lot of people that came to her aid and helped her. First, it was her mother, her family. Then it was Miss Henry, and now you can see Robert Coles. And a lot of times we have children who's going through difficult situations, the psychiatrist will have them draw pictures. So that kind of give you an idea of what's kind of going on with them. And so at the time he was having her, draw pictures, and the bottom one, you see her in the room, school, up there by herself looking out. And I like the picture self-portrait, because that's her smiling. So she always had a good spirit, but he's really wanted to know, and he wanted to help her through this difficult time. Incidentally, he did help some of the white students and some of the other students at the other schools, but he really focused on Ruby because she was doing this by herself. Next, but I want you to hear what he thought about her and her family during this time. He has a great perspective, and when I seen this interview, I was like, you know what? I see what he saw in her, and it's just an amazing video. So just kind of listen up and listen how he actually saw her.
New Orleans was aflame with racial hate and street violence. They were trying to desegregate 2 elementary schools. This little girl was ordered by a federal judge to go into one of them. And she was there all by herself. The whole white population had boycotted the school. no other children with her. And I happened to see this little child going into a school in New Orleans at the age of 6 to the first grade. I thought to myself, I would like to know that child. I'd like to know what's happening to her. One day, having now spent months getting to know Ruby and being rather puzzled at how normal and stoic and strong she was, going through this kind of living hell. 200 people waiting at 8:30 in the morning to tell her they were going to kill her. 200 people in the afternoon telling her they were going to kill her. 25 federal marshals taking her into that building. What would you expect? You'd expect that a child going through that would pretty soon start developing symptoms and be in trouble. I waited and waited, and there weren't any symptoms, and she kept going and learning and being the Ruby that she was, a normal 6-year-old black child, very poor background. Parents didn't even know how to read and write. Humble people. One day, her school teacher said to me, she'd been looking out of the window, and she saw Ruby yet again coming to school. This time she watched carefully, and she noticed that as Ruby was walking past this mob of heckling men and women, she stopped, and the teacher saw her lips moving. I said, Ruby, your teacher told me today that she saw you talking to those people in the street. She said to me, Doctor, I told her that I wasn't talking to the people. I said, well, who were you talking to, Ruby? She said, I told her I was talking to God.
Would you tell our audience why you took them out?
Because I didn't want them to go to school with the niggas.
Why were you praying to God? She said, I was praying for the people in the street. I said, why were you doing that, Ruby? And she said, well, because I wanted to pray for them. I said, you did want to pray for them? Yes, she said. I said, Ruby, why would you want to pray for those people? And then she looked at me and her eyes widened and she said, well, don't you think they need praying for? That stopped me cold. Where did she get that idea, Ruby? She said, well, my mommy and daddy have told me that, and the minister told me that in church. She said, I pray for them every morning, and I pray for them every afternoon when I go home.
I say for the mothers to keep their kids out of school, all together. We're white people. We don't want them to go to school with niggas. I have 5, and they not going to school with no niggas.
And I said, Ruby, those people are so mean to you, and they're so nasty to you. You must have some other feelings toward them besides wanting to pray for them. She said, I just keep praying for them, and I just hope that God will be good to them. I said, what do you say in the prayer, Ruby? I always say the same thing. What's that, Ruby? Well, I always say, please, dear God, forgive them because they don't know what they're doing. Now, I'd heard that someplace before, and I heard it in that kitchen, in that extremely impoverished house, and it silenced me. I had no more questions to ask. Here is a child whom we learned in the 60s to say that she came from a culturally disadvantaged and a culturally deprived home. They were illiterate, her parents, and yet they had taught her biblical truths in a way that she was to live them out. I'd like to see some of us who have fancy educations bring up our children similarly. Do we? I'm not so sure we do. They hadn't read any of these books in childhood. They didn't know anything about this or that stage of moral or psychosexual development, but boy, they knew how to bring up a child in such a way that she could call upon the statements that Jesus called upon, and Isaiah and Jeremiah and Amos. They had memorized in their minds, in church, whole passages from the Old and New Testament, and they tried to live it out. And it would be nice if some of us would try to live things out, not only get an A in biblical literature, or an A in moral analysis, or an A in Southern history, but to get the kind of A Ruby got.
I just really loved his introspection and what he thought about her. I started off this presentation with that prayer that he was speaking of because I thought that was so powerful. Because at 6 years old, going through that and being in an environment, I don't believe, or most people believe, that a 6-year-old child would have the presence of mind to pray for those that were saying those things against her. And that's why I just think it was so remarkable. What he said is just how he could see just how her faith and her family driven her and helped her along this journey. Ruby continued to go through school, and after the spring semester, after the fall semester, she was in the second half of the school year in the spring, and when she was sitting in the classroom, she could actually hear some of the other kids who weren't taken out of school. Like you said earlier, there was about 570 children plus in William France, and probably 98% of them were taken out, but there were a few that were left. And so she could hear them in a cafeteria or in other classrooms. Well, Miss Henry found out that those kids were actually still being in class and still come to class. So she went to the principal and says, according to the law, that desegregation, Ruby is supposed to be with other children, non-white. White children. So she went to the teachers, and sort of the principal's like, no, we're not gonna allow it. But she said, but tell you what we'll do. We'll allow them to come to Ruby's class, but Ruby can't come to their class. So one or two days a week, Ruby would actually have a few of her friends. And then they start letting them actually go to the playground together. And you look at Ruby, you wouldn't think that for a whole year, she had been isolated by herself. She's just a happy-go-lucky, fun girl, just happened to have in a difficult situation. And look, she's just having a great time. So come to the end of the school year, actually the federal marshals stopped actually picking her up, and a taxi started taking her to the school. And so at the end of the school year, she was ready to leave school, and so she's about to get her grades. Well, when the principal found out that Miss Henry gave her high grades, she goes, these grades cannot be accurate. I'm gonna have to change them. And so, are you gonna have to change them? And so Miss Henry said, no, I'm not gonna change them because they're correct. And so the principal was like, well, they can't be correct because technically she received personal, individual attention. So that's why her grades are so high. Well, yeah, you made it that way, but Ruby doesn't know to this day if the grades were actually changed, but she still kind of remember that time. So she ended up leaving the first grade and going to her second grade. And what was different about the second grade was no one picked her up. Her classroom had a few more African Americans in it, and there were no crowds out there. All the crowds had dissipated. So it's kind of like last year never happened. And so she thought it was strange, but she was waiting to go to school and see her first grade teacher, Miss Henry. But Miss Henry became pregnant over the summer, and so she decided to go back to Boston, where her family was, and to raise her kids. So that was the end of her year. Here we go here. I wanted to just talk about is Charles Burke and Ruby linked by history? Okay, this was the marshal that actually drove her every single day. Okay, as you can see, it says there's an article that was written. It says Lonely Ruby 6 likes her guards. Well, you can imagine if someone's being escorted every single day, that they grow a bond. They grow a bond. This is the cutest little girl you could ever meet. And so her and Mr. Charles Burke, they became really great friends, not only during this time, but also years later. So like I said earlier, it kind of takes a village, to kind of help you come along. So she had a family, she had Miss Henry, she had the doctor, and then also you had Charles Burke here. And so, but I wanted you to hear a little bit in his words what he thought about her as well. Here we go.
Now at 5:30, a reunion more than 50 years in the making. It started with one of the most enduring images from the civil rights era. Almost 53 years ago, Ruby Bridges became the first African-American child to integrate a white Southern elementary school.
Well, today, Bridges reunited with a United States Marshal who escorted her to and from school in front of hateful, disapproving crowds. And that reunion took place at the Children's Museum, and our Derek Thomas was there. Derek.
Jenna, U.S. Marshal Charles Burks is now 91 years old. The memory of those days in 1960 have not faded for Burks or for Ruby. She was 6 years old approaching William Frantz School. On their first day of school, students usually get a warm welcome. But on this day, Ruby was greeted by a jeering crowd with signs that indicated she was not wanted. One of her escorts was Charles Burks. This is him then, this is him now. He and Ruby are together again. He reflected on his mission back on November 14th, 1960.
Making sure that nothing happened to Ruby, that was the most important thing. And it's also protecting yourself, because if something happened, it wouldn't have been just her.
The magnitude of that moment did not escape the nation's view. In 1964, Norman Rockwell painted this picture entitled "The Problem We All Live With." The little girl and the U.S. Marshal made a difference.
It changed the face of education. That it was very, very important. For a long time, I thought it was a part of history, a story that was kind of swept under the rug and people not really talked about it.
Bridges is wrong on that count. Kids today talk about Ruby Bridges.
Just an amazing experience that we are able to now not need guards and not have mobs outside of our school, that she would pave this road for us that will now make our education different.
That's true, but the job is not done.
We who are good and of like minds, we can help to fight the evil that's out there, plaguing our country and our communities.
These old partners in civil rights were there when it all began, and they hope to be a part of it when the job is done. Now, Burks is the last surviving marshal that escorted Ruby. He currently lives in Logansport. Derek Thomas, RTV6.
I just thought, that was phenomenal that they kept those relationships long after that year. Here, they actually had made a movie of her life. If you're on the streaming, you have a streaming, I think it's on Disney. They actually have Ruby Bridges' story. At the bottom, you see Leela Rocha plays her mother. The little girl plays Ruby. They look similar alike, and that's Ruby Bridges in the middle. So it's interesting because when I speak to a lot of folks, they haven't really heard of her, but a lot of people and a lot of things has been done because of her. And it's just a great story that when I ran across this, I just think I want this to be part of my Unveiled series. I think I just want to shed light on an icon, a little girl that you may not have even heard of, but it's just some phenomenal things. So you get a chance to look it up. Here, she met Barack in the White House when he was president, as well as Kamala Harris, Vice President Harris, before she actually became vice president. Let me tell you a little bit about that picture that was painted by the famous painter Norman Rockwell. Well, when Ruby was going through this in 1960, there was a writer by the name of John Steinbeck. And he was traveling through the countryside writing a book and articles. It was called Travels with Charlie, where Charlie was his dog. And so he'd go to different cities and kind of write about them. Well, he actually came across New Orleans and seen the crowds and everything that was going on at William Frantz School. And he actually wrote about it in one of his articles. Well, Norman Rockwell actually read that article, and from that article wrote this picture. And this picture became a famous, iconic picture, and that was hung in the White House. I'm not sure if it's still there, but it was hung there. John Steinbeck he wrote the book Grapes of Wrath. It used to be required reading in college, and he won a Nobel Prize for literature. So you think about like a pebble, when you throw it into the lake and the rings that come out. I was kind of thinking about it. So when Ruby's parents decided to let her go, she threw a pebble, and that pebble escalated to and widened out to John Steinbeck, to Rockwell, to her actually meeting President Obama, and her picture being hung up in the White House. So I also want you just to hear a little bit of her time with Barack. I thought it was really, really good. Here we go.
I think it's fair to say that if it hadn't been for you guys, I might not be here and we wouldn't be looking at this together. So
just having him say that meant a lot to me, and it always has. But to be standing shoulder to shoulder with history and viewing history, it's just once in a lifetime. The painting depicts my walk into William Frantz School, integrating the public school systems in 1960.
Can you still put your head back into these terms?
Absolutely.
You can still kind of
Definitely.
go back there?
Yes, and I do every day. The girl in that painting at 6 years old knew absolutely nothing about racism. I was going to school that day. But the lesson that I took away that year in an empty school building was that none of us know anything about disliking one another when we come into the world. It is something that's passed on to us. So every time I see that, I think about the fact that I was an innocent child that knew absolutely nothing about what was happening that day, but that I learned a very valuable lesson. And that is that we should never look at a person and judge them by the color of their skin. That's the lesson that I learned in first grade.
I love the fact when she said, I was standing shoulder to shoulder with history and looking at history. I thought that was really profound. I really like that. So yeah. So she got a chance to meet the president. That's just awesome. Okay, well, this wasn't actually part of the presentation. I just thought it was cool, so I put it in there. So here it says, from Ruby to the White House. I see the picture, I was like, you know what, this is just too good to pass up. So that's why I take the poetic license. But yeah, I just thought that was a really strong, powerful image of where she started and where we're at right now. This is probably the last time that all of them were together, Ruby, her mother, Charles, and Miss Henry. They took a picture outside of William Frantz. Here they dedicated an actual sign out there for her. So if you go there, you'll see this up and actually kind of read about it, what happened to her. This paying a tribute to her. I think her mother recently passed sometime last year, and I believe Mr. Burke has passed as well. I'm not too sure about Miss Henry. I believe she's still alive, but as of today, I'm not really exactly sure. But I just thought this was a really nice picture of them after all these years. Ruby and Miss Henry, they actually became lifelong friends. After they left, after she left school, you know, Ruby continued her education, graduated, and they kind of lost touch for about 30 years. And then when some articles started coming out about her, and some books were coming out about Ruby, Miss Henry read them and, you know, made contact with Ruby, and they got together again after all those years. And Ruby had grown up and she had gone on and retired. And so even now they attend book signings together, they go places together. Whenever Ruby's meetings, sometimes they'll meet and just do different things, but they remain good friends even to this day. Takes a village. You see a monument or a little statue that was set up for her. And I like the little bow tie, the little bow they put in her hair. And they actually named elementary school for her. So at the beginning of this, my presentation, I said a child will lead us. Well, I truly believe that now a child has led us. And I think we looked at Ruby and her life and the things that she did and continue to do to this day, and the impact she had on civil rights. Her journey was remarkable. Her resilience, her determination, and just her spirit affected so many people, and some people don't even know. And so I just really appreciate her story, and I just liked how it all unfolded. But that's my time for today. This has been Ruby Bridges Unveiled, and I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you can come on again at my next episode of Unveiled. Next, we're going to have some Q&A, so if you want to ask me any questions, I think Ms. Randolph will open up for any Q&As.
Hello, I'm Bunsett Facility. I wondered, did she ever talk about what her mother would say to her when she got home? Did she ever say anything about that?
Yes, they would talk. Cause there was time when Ruby would come home and she would have nightmares, you know. And so she would run to her mother's bed, and her mother said, "You just make sure you pray. You just make sure you pray to God." And that faith held her through that whole year. And she just remembered, okay, I'm just going to pray. So that's why when I opened up with a prayer, and then you heard even the psychologist talk about, Mr. Cole talk about the prayer, that was the thread that ran through her, that, you know, when things get tough, I'm going to go to the Lord and pray. So yeah, they always talked about that. Good question. Thank you.
Hey, James, can I make a comment? Hey, this is Raymond DeLone, man. You did an outstanding job. I appreciate it. Excellent.
Thank you, Raymond. Thank you.
Hey, I just wanted to bring out a couple of points. I have like 9, but I won't go through 9. But one is, what a brave child. What a brave child that girl was. And then the hate and the evil of her oppressors. And then the race pride, even though it was distorted, the race pride that the white people had, that they would gather day after day to shout at a young kid. And this would be almost my last point. My last point is, okay, and my last point is, and they brought this out, she was really a sacrificial lamb, and they brought it out by her prayer later. And I wrote this down way before the prayer, but my thought was, she was a sacrificial lamb. She always had a smile, even at the very end, even with Barack and everything, she had that same smile. And even when she was going up the stairs, she would look back at the people. When she was riding in the car, she would look at the people. It didn't faze her.
Right.
So she was really the sacrificial lamb for everybody. And let me see if there's anything else.
Take your time.
Okay, cool. And then the heart of Miss Henry. I mean, that was a great thing that she did, and she was placed there for a reason.
Yes, sir.
And let me see. Oh, okay. And this is kind of, I don't want to offend anybody, but getting back to the race pride, because they used it for evil. And let me go to this point. How her mother said, "You're going to a new school, you better behave." Now look at the difference between what the Black parents taught their kids. You better behave, you better have respect, you better show pride. And then the white pride, and I'm not slamming anybody, but I'm making an observation, was bitterness. And again, and you even pointed this out, they saw change. They saw change, and they were in opposition of change, and they would do anything to oppress that change. And I'm gonna stop there, but excellent, brother.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments, Ray. Appreciate it. Appreciate it. Thank you, Ray.
James, I have a comment. This is Anna Christian.
Oh, hey, Anna.
Yeah, you know, I was thinking about those white parents that took their kids out of school. Did those kids did they get any education? Did they fall behind? Did the parents do school? I'm sure they probably didn't go into any of that.
Right. They didn't get any. They were like homeschooled because they wouldn't let them go to another school.
Yeah.
Overpacked. So yeah, I believe they're homeschooled. That's a good question though. Yeah.
Yeah. I also wanted to know about her, you know, did she ever, as she was growing up, do you find did she have any traumas or anything that happened to her, you know, after she got out of school? And did she mention anything? Did she get married? Did she have children? You know, any of those kinds of things? Great question. Grew up, graduated from college, got married, 2 kids, live in Louisiana right now. The only traumatic thing, like her father had passed. They had, her mother and father had gotten divorced, and then he had passed. But for years, she didn't even think about what she did was even that important. And so it wasn't until people started writing about her and that her mother was like, hey, you know, people are being inspired by your story, that she even started to go back in and you know, own her story and start being a public speaker. One of the things I didn't speak about, I couldn't put everything in, but during the time, she's getting a lot of encouragement, because what happened is when they found out that she was going to a school, her father was fired from his job. He was a great mechanic, but he was fired because she was going to a white school. So they had a lot of money and financial issues, but people heard her story from around the country and around the world, and they started sending her money as well as letters of encouragement. And she said that the best one that she actually received was from Eleanor Roosevelt, the wife of Franklin Roosevelt, and how she was just so proud of her, and she cherished that letter. But unfortunately, those letters of encouragement in Eleanor Roosevelt was washed away in one of the Louisiana floods. I think it was Betsy, and along with her dad's Purple Heart. So she had a lot of encouragement, but her trauma, she really didn't have anything because she didn't really think about it, you know, and she's kind of just went on. But yeah, you would have thought that maybe she would have some animosity towards some folks, but she never did. Like Raymond said earlier, her spirit was always just, you know, centered, God-centered. So it helped her even in her everyday life. Thank you.
Good question though, thank you, good question.
Hey, Uncle James, it's
Hello.
Autumn. So I mean, this was amazing, and I think it really is a lesson for all of us too, and it's inspiring because it just goes to show you that you know, God always makes provision. So you know, everything, and that was just, you were just showing that everything she needed, encouragement, he sent somebody to do that. The education, he put that on the heart of the right teacher to do that. Protection, he sent the right person to come and do that. Like everything that she needed, he provided. Maybe not in the ways that we think that, you know,
True.
you know, that she, you know, a kid should get, but he made sure she got it. So that's incredible. But you mentioned her dad, and I just wanted to know if there was anything else that we knew about her dad. Did he ever come around? Like, did he ever change his mind, or?
Well, I think he changed his mind just in the sense that, well, it was kind of rough for him, because being a man in the house and then losing your job based on your child going to school, that kind of disturbed his masculinity and head of the household. So he ultimately came around, but I think it was kind of difficult because afterwards the family ended up breaking up, and he lived in the same house, and the mother, Lucille, they moved to another city, or at least another area of the city.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. There was a lot going on with him, but in terms of her being centered, it's interesting. I think about that too. Funny you said that. I think about that too, because God will put people in your life when you need it. Because how unlikely would a psychiatrist just be happy to walk by and see her? How unlikely would someone, a famous writer, write about her and then it becomes a painting, iconic painting?
Right.
You know, so everything is just, you could tell God was in the works here. So yeah.
Yeah, and people sending them money for food. Dad
Oh
lost
my
his
goodness.
job around the world. People, he said, I'll meet every need. That's incredible.
That's incredible story.
Yeah.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Thank you. Good question. Thank you.
Yeah, she was a very courageous. Thank you, James, for this. She was a very courageous young woman. And again, as I saw in the chat, many of us recognize it's the foundation that we lay for our children that is so important, because we have no idea God's plan for their lives, and it made a difference. But it also appeared to make a difference in Mrs. Henry's life. Being
Yes.
from Boston, she had a totally different mindset as a teacher. And because of that, and then coincidental, she's only there for that 1 year, because she gets pregnant, she goes back to Boston.
That's right.
Again, like Autumn was saying, God's hand is throughout this. And I would ask everyone to take this as encouragement, because of the time we're living in now, to be brave and courageous, and given an opportunity, just know God is going to provide everything you need to get the job done. Thank you, James.
Yeah.
Amen. Amen to that. Amen to that. Thank you. I appreciate that.
James, I just wanted to say that thank you for making that connection between, you know, that photo that you're showing that Norman Rockwell did. I think that was on the cover of either Life magazine or one, because that's a famous picture. I remember seeing that. And to make that connection between John Steinbeck and the article, you know, and all, that's fantastic. I thank you so much for that.
Great research.
Yeah, really good.
You know, it's go ahead.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, this is Trey, your son. No, it's, I agree with the other individual that just had a lot of bullet points. But no, beautiful presentation. I appreciate how you took all these ingredients when it came to her life and presented it so beautifully. And it was like a nice mosaic of videos that you had sprinkled in there, pictures, historical accounts. So it's just a really good job. And, you know, just dealing with COVID right now, everyone's kind of dealing with isolation. So you just gave me and my wife a movie to watch tonight. So we'll watch Ruby Bridges. So you might be able to write Disney Plus and get a check or something. At least try to, you know, at least try to.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, but I appreciate it.
Thank you, Trey. Appreciate it. Appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you all so much. So yeah, so like I said earlier, you know, I think it's a great story. And it's interesting that she even said that it's a story that she thought was swept under the rug, and maybe to a certain extent it was. But hopefully, like I said, I do a series called Unveiled, where I try to unveil prominent individuals or groups of individuals through history that have been omitted that you may not have heard of, but just has great stories. So whenever you see something like on my Facebook page or Instagram, you see Unveiled, you know, hope you can log on and tell your friends. If you enjoy it, you know, please tell your friends. Like earlier, Miss Tracy was saying some of the things that I did, like Robert Smalls, you know, you look him up, and just all these different great characters. I think that would give us a sense of who we are if we understand some of these stories, because a lot of these stories have been omitted from the history books. But if we can kind of learn them and understand them, I think our youth as well as ourselves will really benefit from it. But I just want to thank everybody for showing up. I really do, and I appreciate the comments. And if there's no other questions,
Hey, James, can I say one more thing, man? You had up to 31 participants, and everybody was richly blessed by your research and the way you presented it. So just want to let you know you did an excellent job, man.
Thank you. And also, I just want to give a shout out to Ray. He's been putting on an African American series. It started on Martin Luther King's birthday on January 18th, and it runs every night except for Wednesdays until the end of February. And I will be doing an unveiled on the 22nd of February from the Pullman Porters. And so he's doing a phenomenal job. So if every night at 7 o'clock, other than Wednesdays, if you want to look at a great presentation, just ask me and I can send you out the link, and you kind of log on. But it's a blessing for everybody, and we're all just trying to bring awareness to stories that we all may not have heard of. So thank you, Raymond. I appreciate it.
No problem, James. Appreciate you, man.
James, before you go, just to let everybody know, I want to thank you on behalf of the Glen Avon Library, and as the manager, how much I appreciate just the participation and the chats and the questions and the comments that came in. You know, a lot of you mentioned how, you know, certain people come into your life at a certain time. And when I connected to James through the Moreno Valley Library, he didn't realize that we're both North High Husky alums. So, yay! So there was definitely a reason for us to do this program together. Right. And I want to thank him because it was awesome. I even learned something new about Ruby Bridges, and have been sharing with other people. Did you guys know who she was? And just how she recently at the Midwinter American Library Association did a presentation, which I shared with James too. So it was awesome to see how she's relevant right now, and so that children can learn about her. There are a lot of children's books that have been written about her that we have in our library on our Facebook page. Our Facebook banner has pictures of some of those book covers. So I just want to say thanks again, everybody who came and participated, and I hope you learned something new about Ruby Bridges. And, you know, go to your local library and do some research and check out books about her, because we do have those available. So thank you again. Thanks, James.
Yeah, I just want to say one last thing. The one that's phenomenal about the story is that, believe it or not, she's only like 66 years old. So all this was in our lifetime.
Oh my God.
She's only 66 years old. I mean, you've seen her up there with Barack. And that's why it's, you know, it's such an amazing story. But like Tracy said, the Glen Avon Regional Library, they're doing great work out there. They're doing great programming. So I really appreciate her reaching out to me to do this program. So if you get an opportunity in the future, go see the Glen Avon Regional Library, say hi to Tracy, and I think you'll have a really good experience. So thanks everybody.
Thank you.
No, thank you, James.
Thank you.
All right, my brother. Take care.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks again, James.
You're welcome.
Great.
Great job.